Imagine walking into your kitchen on a quiet morning, turning on the tap and feeling grateful for that stream of clean, room-temperature water flowing over your hands. Not too hot, not too cold, just perfectly comfortable. Then imagine opening your refrigerator. Not the freezer, mind you, but just the regular refrigerator section, and thinking how nothing could possibly be alive in there. It's far too cold. Or picture standing near a campfire on a cool evening, watching the flames dance and knowing with absolute certainty that nothing could survive in that searing heat. We've built our entire understanding of life around our own narrow comfort zone, haven't we? Tonight, we're embarking on perhaps the most mind-bending journey we've ever taken together. Not outward to distant stars or back through cosmic time, but right here on Earth, to places that will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about what life requires to survive. We're going to meet organisms so alien, so impossibly resilient, that they've forced scientists to rewrite the rules of biology itself. Hello, and welcome to the Sleepy Astronomer. If you're settling in for the first time, welcome to our gentle exploration of the universe's most surprising secrets. And if you've travelled with me before through the cosmos and its mysteries, it's wonderful to have you back for what might be our strangest adventure yet. Whether you're curled up in bed, nestled in a favourite chair, or perhaps lying somewhere you can feel the comfortable temperature of your surroundings, I'm so glad you're here to discover just how extraordinarily narrow our human definition of comfortable really is. Tonight, we'll journey to places on our own planet that are more alien than the surface of Mars. We'll meet creatures that thrive in boiling acid, organisms that treat deadly radiation like a warm summer's day, and life forms that have been frozen solid for millions of years, yet remain perfectly, impossibly alive. These aren't science fiction fantasies. They're our neighbours, Earth's own alien ambassadors, quietly redefining what it means to be alive in a universe far stranger and more creative than we ever dared imagine. Our story begins in the most unlikely places. Volcanic springs where the water boils continuously, Antarctic valleys colder than a deep freeze, caves so acidic they could dissolve metal, and depths where the pressure would instantly crush any surface dweller. In each of these seemingly impossible environments, life isn't just surviving, it's thriving with an enthusiasm that would make our most optimistic scientists weep with joy. These discoveries haven't just changed biology, they've revolutionized our entire search for life beyond Earth. Every time we find organisms flourishing in conditions we thought were absolutely lethal, we expand the map of where life might exist in the cosmos. If life can thrive in Earth's most hostile environments, then perhaps those frozen moons of Jupiter, those acid-clouded atmospheres of distant planets, those radiation-blasted surfaces of alien worlds, aren't the barren wastelands we once imagined. There's something deeply humbling about realizing that what we consider extreme conditions are often just Tuesday afternoon for countless organisms that call our planet home. They've been here far longer than we have, quietly going about their business in environments that would kill us in seconds, completely indifferent to our assumptions about what life should need or want or require. So, settle back into whatever perfectly comfortable conditions you've arranged for yourself tonight, and prepare to have your mind gently expanded by Earth's most incredible citizens. Take a deep breath of that lovely oxygen-rich air at just the right pressure and temperature, and let's begin our journey to meet the aliens who never left home. In boiling springs and frozen wastelands, in acid baths and crushing depths, life waits to show us just how creative the universe can be when it decides to dream up new ways to exist. Picture yourself settling into a warm bath after a long day. The water is just right, maybe 37 degrees Celsius, perfectly matching your body temperature. Not too hot to scald, not too cool to send shivers down your spine. As you sink into that blissful warmth, you might find yourself thinking that this is exactly what life should feel like. Comfortable, safe, just the right amount of everything, with nothing too extreme to disturb the peace. This lovely, reasonable assumption about what life requires has been guiding human thinking for most of our history. We look around at the world we know, the plants in our gardens growing in rich, moderate soil, the fish swimming in pleasantly temperate streams, the birds flying through air that's neither too thick nor too thin, and we naturally assume that this is simply how life works. Everything alive must need conditions rather like the ones we prefer ourselves. It's such a sensible way of thinking, isn't it? After all, when early scientists began studying life in earnest, they were looking at the familiar organisms around them. Humans, dogs, cats, roses, oak trees, goldfish, all creatures that seem to share our preference for moderation. Not too hot, not too cold, not too acidic, not too salty. Like the fairy tale character Goldilocks sampling the three bears' porridge, life appeared to need everything to be just right. By the middle of the 20th century, this comfortable assumption had crystallized into what scientists confidently called the requirements for life. Temperature? Well, certainly nothing above about 70 degrees Celsius, roughly the heat of a very hot cup of coffee. Any hotter, and the delicate proteins that make life possible would simply fall apart like a souffle in a thunderstorm. Cold was equally problematic. Below freezing, the water that life depends on would turn to ice, grinding all biological processes to a halt. As for chemistry, life clearly needed clean, neutral conditions. Nothing too acidic, nothing too basic. Think of how your stomach feels after too much lemon juice, or how your skin stings if you accidentally splash household bleach on it. Living tissues simply couldn't survive in environments that were chemically aggressive. And radiation? Completely out of the question. Everyone knew that radiation was death to living things, breaking apart the very molecules that cells needed to function. Scientists were so certain of these requirements that they rarely even thought of them as assumptions. They were simply facts about how the universe worked, as obvious and unquestionable as the fact that water flows downhill or that the sun rises in the east. University textbooks stated these limits with absolute confidence, and generations of students dutifully memorized them as immutable laws of biology. But the universe, as we're about to discover, has a rather mischievous sense of humour when it comes to human certainty. The first crack in this comfortable worldview came from an unlikely source, the hot springs of Yellowstone National Park. Now, you might think that such a famous and well-visited place would have been thoroughly explored by scientists long before the 1960s. But that's the peculiar thing about assumptions. They have a way of making us overlook what's right in front of us. Thomas Brock was a microbiologist with an unusual hobby. While most tourists visited Yellowstone to admire the geysers and photograph the buffalo, Brock found himself fascinated by something much smaller, the beautiful coloured mats that floated on the surface of the park's hot springs. These formations created natural art in pools of steaming water, swirling patterns of orange and yellow and green that looked almost too perfect to be natural. The conventional wisdom, of course, was that these colourful formations couldn't possibly be alive. The water in these springs was literally boiling in some places, far too hot for any living thing to survive. The colours must be mineral deposits, perhaps stained by traces of dead organic matter that had fallen in and been immediately sterilised by the heat. It was a perfectly logical explanation that satisfied everyone except Thomas Brock. who had that most dangerous of scientific qualities, curiosity about things that seemed too obvious to question. On a warm summer day in 1966, Brock knelt beside one of these hot springs with a simple glass tube, carefully collecting samples of the supposedly lifeless coloured material. Back in his laboratory, he prepared slides and placed them under his microscope, expecting to see interesting but definitely dead mineral formations. What he saw instead was so unexpected that he initially thought his equipment must be malfunctioning. The samples were absolutely alive, not just barely clinging to existence, but positively teeming with bacteria that seemed to be having the time of their lives in water, hot enough to brew tea. These microscopic organisms were swimming, dividing, and going about their daily business with complete indifference to the fact that they were living in conditions that should have killed them instantly. Brock named his discovery Thermus aquaticus, the hot water bacterium. This little organism was thriving in temperatures of 70 degrees Celsius and could survive even hotter conditions, completely rewriting the rules about what life could tolerate. It was rather like discovering someone not just surviving, but actually enjoying a relaxing swim in a pot of boiling soup, chatting happily with friends and showing no signs of distress whatsoever. The scientific community's reaction was, well, let's say it was less than enthusiastic. Brock's findings were so far outside accepted biological theory that many of his colleagues simply refused to believe them. There must have been contamination, they insisted. Perhaps the temperature measurements were wrong. Maybe these weren't really living organisms at all, but some kind of complex chemical reaction that mimicked life without actually being alive. It's rather touching, really, how hard scientists worked to preserve their comfortable assumptions, rather than accept that they might have been wrong about something so fundamental. The idea that life could actually enjoy boiling water was so alien to biological thinking that it took years of repeated experiments and multiple confirmations before the scientific establishment grudgingly admitted that perhaps, just perhaps, their textbooks might need a few revisions. But here's where the story takes a delightful turn. Sometimes the universe's sense of humour extends to making sure that the discoveries we initially reject become absolutely essential to our future progress. That impossible bacterium, Thermus aquaticus, turned out to have enzymes that could function perfectly at high temperatures, enzymes that became the foundation for one of the most important techniques in modern molecular biology. You see, scientists had developed a method called PCR, polymerase chain reaction, that could make millions of copies of specific pieces of DNA. This technique revolutionized everything from medical diagnosis to forensic science, but it required repeatedly heating samples to near boiling temperatures and then cooling them down again. Normal enzymes would be destroyed by this process, but the heat-loving enzymes from Thermus aquaticus could survive these temperature cycles without breaking a sweat. The organism that wasn't supposed to exist became one of the most commercially important discoveries in the history of biotechnology. Every COVID test, every paternity test, every piece of genetic research you've ever heard of depends on enzymes from bacteria that live in boiling water. It's one of those perfect ironies that make you wonder if the universe plans these things deliberately. But Thomas Brock's discovery was just the opening act in a much larger revolution. Once scientists started looking for life in places they'd assumed were sterile, they began finding it everywhere. The deep ocean, where crushing pressure and scalding heat from volcanic vents should have made life impossible, turned out to be home to entire ecosystems that had never seen sunlight. Antarctic valleys, colder than most home freezers, hosted thriving bacterial communities. Caves filled with acid strong enough to dissolve metal were bustling with organisms that seemed to find such conditions perfectly pleasant. Each new discovery forced scientists to redraw the boundaries of where life could exist, and each redrawing revealed new environments that had been overlooked simply because they fell outside human comfort zones. It was becoming embarrassingly clear that the word extreme in extreme environments was only extreme from a very particular, very human perspective. The most profound revelation came when Carl Woese, a quiet microbiologist working at the University of Illinois, began using genetic techniques to study the evolutionary relationships between these heat-loving, acid-tolerant, pressure-resistant organisms. What he discovered was so shocking that it initially earned him ridicule from his colleagues and took decades to be fully accepted by the scientific community. Woese found that many of these organisms weren't just unusual bacteria, they were something else entirely, so genetically different from both bacteria and the complex cells that make up plants and animals that they represented a completely separate domain of life. He called them archaea, meaning ancient ones, because his genetic analysis suggested they were among the oldest forms of life on Earth. It was rather like spending your whole life thinking there were only two types of animals, say mammals and birds, and then discovering that what you'd assumed was just an unusual mammal was actually something completely different, more closely related to an alien life form than to anything you'd ever seen before. The tree of life, which biologists had confidently divided into two main branches, suddenly needed a third branch to accommodate these ancient extremophiles. But here's the truly mind-bending part. As scientists study this archaea more closely, they realize that many of them didn't just tolerate extreme conditions, they actually required them to survive. These weren't organisms that had been forced into harsh environments and learned to cope. They were organisms that had evolved in these conditions and couldn't live anywhere else. To them, the pleasant, moderate environments that humans consider ideal were actually hostile and uninhabitable. Think about that for a moment. The comfortable conditions you're experiencing right now, the gentle temperature, the breathable air, the neutral pH of your surroundings, would be as lethal to many of Earth's organisms as boiling acid would be to you. Our normal world is actually a highly specialized niche that happens to suit a particular group of relatively recent evolutionary newcomers. This discovery completely flipped our understanding of what constitutes a normal environment for life. Instead of extreme organisms being unusual adaptations to harsh conditions, it began to look like moderate temperature, oxygen-breathing, neutral pH-loving life forms like us, were the real specialists adapted to a narrow range of conditions that represent just a tiny slice of the environments where life can thrive. Ancient creation stories from cultures around the world suddenly seemed remarkably insightful. Many traditions spoke of life emerging from fire, from the underworld, from places of chaos and violence that seemed hostile to any organized existence. The Aboriginal Dreamtime speaks of ancestral beings creating life through intense journeys across harsh landscapes. Hindu cosmology describes cycles of creation and destruction, where order emerges from primordial chaos. Celtic mythology tells of the otherworld, where the normal rules don't apply and impossible things become possible. These stories, created by people who had never heard of thermophiles or archaea, somehow captured a truth that modern science took centuries to rediscover, that life's greatest creativity often expresses itself not in comfortable, predictable environments, but in places that challenge our assumptions about what should be possible. Medieval alchemists, with their fascination with transmutation and their belief that profound changes could occur under extreme conditions, were perhaps closer to understanding life's true nature than the more cautious scientists who followed them. The alchemical practice of subjecting materials to intense heat, powerful acids, and crushing pressure mirrors almost exactly the environments where we now know some of Earth's most successful and ancient organisms make their homes. As we settle deeper into our exploration of these remarkable organisms, it's worth pausing to appreciate how completely they've transformed our understanding of life itself. Every assumption we made about what life requires — moderate temperature, clean water, gentle chemistry, protection from radiation — has been systematically demolished by organisms that not only survive, but thrive in conditions we considered impossible. These discoveries haven't just changed biology, they've revolutionized our entire search for life beyond Earth. Every time we find organisms flourishing in seemingly impossible conditions here on our own planet, we expand the list of places in the universe where life might exist. Those frozen moons of Jupiter and Saturn, those acid-shrouded planets orbiting distant stars, those radiation-blasted worlds that we once dismissed as sterile wastelands. They're all looking a lot more promising now that we know what life is actually capable of. Next, we'll journey to some of the hottest places on Earth, where organisms have learned to make themselves perfectly at home in temperatures that would literally cook most life forms. But for now, let yourself settle into the comfortable realization that life is far more creative, far more resilient, and far more surprising than we ever dared to imagine. The universe, it turns out, is much better at supporting life than we gave it credit for. We just needed to stop assuming that every living thing would share our particular preferences for moderate, predictable conditions. Think about the hottest bath you've ever taken. You probably eased yourself in slowly, testing the water with your toe first, maybe letting out a little gasp as the heat embraced your skin. Perhaps it was almost too hot to bear, but in that perfect, slightly masochistic way that makes a good soak so satisfying. Now imagine that bath water being twice as hot, then imagine it being 3 times as hot. Keep going until you reach temperatures that would literally cook an egg, and you're starting to approach the living conditions that some of Earth's most remarkable residents consider perfectly comfortable. I know it sounds impossible, doesn't it? The idea that anything could not just survive, but actually thrive in water hot enough to brew tea, seems to violate everything we understand about the delicate chemistry of life. And yet, scattered across the deepest, darkest parts of our planet's oceans, there are entire communities of organisms throwing what can only be described as the universe's most improbable garden party, complete with guests who prefer their environment at temperatures that would send the rest of us running for the nearest fire extinguisher. These aren't just tough survivors clinging to life in harsh conditions. No, these organisms, scientists call them hyperthermophiles, which is a delightfully dramatic way of saying extreme heat lovers, are having the time of their lives in environments so hot they make a sauna feel like a cool spring morning. The first time humans stumbled upon these impossible communities was rather like Alice falling down the rabbit hole and finding herself in a world where all the familiar rules had been cheerfully discarded. Picture the scene. It's 1977, and a small research submarine called Alvin is descending through miles of crushing darkness toward the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The scientists aboard are looking for evidence of underwater volcanic activity, expecting to find nothing more interesting than some warm rocks and perhaps a few interesting mineral formations. Instead, they found themselves face to face with something that looked like it had been borrowed from another planet entirely. Rising from the seafloor like underwater chimneys were towering structures belching clouds of superheated water that shimmered and danced in the submarine's lights like liquid aurora. These hydrothermal vents were creating their own alien weather systems in the deep ocean, underwater tornadoes of mineral-rich water, heated to temperatures that should have been a death sentence for any living thing. But around these impossible fountains of liquid fire, life wasn't just present, it was having an absolute celebration. Giant tube worms, some taller than basketball players, swayed in the toxic currents like they were dancing to music only they could hear. Ghostly white crabs skittered across the volcanic rocks with the casual air of tourists strolling through a pleasant park, and everywhere, invisible to the naked eye but absolutely essential to this entire underwater circus, were countless billions of microscopic organisms that had somehow convinced themselves that boiling water was the perfect place to raise a family. Now, you might be wondering how any living thing could possibly function in such conditions. After all, proteins, those crucial molecules that do most of the work in living cells, are notoriously fragile. Heat them up too much and they unfold like a house of cards in a strong wind, becoming about as useful as a chocolate teapot. This is why fever is dangerous for humans and why cooking food works. Heat disrupts the delicate molecular machinery of life. But these remarkable organisms have solved the heat problem with a kind of molecular engineering that would make any architect weep with envy. Their proteins are held together by extra chemical bonds that act like tiny molecular seatbelts, keeping everything locked in place even when the temperature would normally cause complete structural collapse. It's rather like building a house that's designed to withstand earthquakes. You add extra bracing and reinforcement in all the right places, so that when the shaking starts, everything stays exactly where it belongs. Their cell membranes, too, are marvels of biological engineering. While ordinary cell membranes would melt like butter on a hot sidewalk at these temperatures, thermophile membranes are made of special lipids that remain perfectly stable even in conditions that would literally cook most other forms of life. They're like biological spacesuits, protecting the delicate cellular machinery from an environment that should be utterly hostile. One of my favourite examples of these impossible organisms is something called Pyrococcus furiosus. The name alone is pure poetry. It translates roughly to furious fireball, which seems like exactly the sort of name you'd give to a microscopic organism that's decided to make its home in conditions that would sterilize surgical equipment. This little bacterium currently holds the record for thriving in the hottest environment, where life has been confirmed, living quite contentedly at temperatures up to 103 degrees Celsius. To put that in perspective, this organism's ideal vacation spot is hotter than the temperature at which you'd pasteurize milk to kill harmful bacteria. It's hotter than most hot springs, hotter than the hottest sauna, hot enough to make a cup of tea without waiting for the kettle to boil. And yet P. furiosus treats these conditions like a gentle tropical beach, swimming around with the casual contentment of someone enjoying a perfect summer day. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about these deep-sea communities isn't just their tolerance for extreme heat. It's the fact that they've completely reimagined where life's energy can come from. While most of the life we're familiar with ultimately depends on energy from the sun, these organisms have learned to live off the planet itself. They practice what scientists rather poetically call chemosynthesis, using the chemical energy released when hot minerals meet cold seawater to power all the processes of life. It's a bit like discovering a community of people who have learned to live entirely off the heat generated by their house's furnace, never needing to step outside or install solar panels or plug into the electrical grid. They've found a way to extract energy directly from the Earth's own restless geology, tapping into volcanic processes that have been running continuously for billions of years. These underwater vents are constantly building and rebuilding themselves through processes that seem almost magical. As the superheated water erupts from cracks in the seafloor, it immediately encounters the near-freezing ocean water around it. The shock of this temperature difference causes dissolved minerals to precipitate out of solution almost instantly, like underwater snow falling upward and sticking to whatever it touches. Over time, this mineral snow builds towering chimneys that can grow several meters in a single year. Some of these structures reach heights of 60 meters or more. Imagine underwater skyscrapers built entirely by the patient accumulation of chemistry, with no architects or construction crews, just the endless meeting of fire and ice creating something beautiful and impossible. The landscape around these vents changes constantly as new chimneys grow and old ones collapse, creating a dynamic underwater cityscape that's never quite the same from one visit to the next. It's rather like living in a city where the buildings grow like plants and the geography reshapes itself according to the whims of underground chemistry. Each vent creates its own unique neighborhood, with different temperature zones and chemical conditions. Right at the base of the chimney, where the water is hottest, you'll find the most extreme heat lovers, organisms that literally cannot survive in cooler conditions. Move just a few meters away, where the temperatures moderate slightly, and you'll encounter entirely different species that have their own preferences for just how toasty their environment should be. It's like having an entire city's worth of climate zones compressed into the space of a large room, each one supporting its own specialized community of residents, with very particular ideas about what constitutes comfortable living conditions. The discovery of these impossible communities completely revolutionized our thinking about where life's energy could come from and how long it could persist. These ecosystems are entirely independent of the sun. They could continue thriving even if our star suddenly winked out of existence tomorrow. They represent a form of life that's been quietly pursuing its own agenda in Earth's most remote and inaccessible places for billions of years, completely indifferent to whatever was happening on the surface. This discovery has profound implications for our search for life elsewhere in the cosmos. If organisms can thrive around volcanic vents in Earth's deep oceans, then perhaps similar communities could exist in the hidden seas beneath the ice shells of Europa and Enceladus, those mysterious moons orbiting Jupiter and Saturn. These distant worlds almost certainly have their own underwater volcanic activity, creating the same kinds of chemical energy sources that power life in our planet's deepest waters. Ancient myths and stories from cultures around the world contain surprisingly accurate intuitions about life emerging from fire and the marriage of opposing elements. The Greek story of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods speaks to something profound about fire as both destroyer and creator. Hindu traditions describe Agni, the sacred fire that transforms and purifies while creating new possibilities. Celtic tales of the otherworld describe places where normal rules don't apply, and impossible things become everyday occurrences. These stories, created by people who never could have imagined hydrothermal vents, somehow captured essential truths about the creative power of extreme conditions. They understood intuitively that life's greatest innovations often emerge not from comfort and stability, but from the marriage of opposing forces. Fire and water, creation and destruction, the impossible becoming routine. Indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest, living above some of these underwater volcanic systems, had oral traditions about underwater mountains that breathed fire and supported forms of life that never saw daylight. These stories, passed down through generations, contained wisdom about the deep ocean that Western science only confirmed in recent decades. The practical applications of studying these heat-loving organisms have turned out to be remarkably diverse. The enzymes that allow them to function at extreme temperatures have found their way into everything from laundry detergents that work in hot water to industrial processes that require high-temperature chemistry. Some of these organisms produce compounds that might become the basis for new medicines, having evolved sophisticated ways of dealing with toxic environments that could help humans cope with disease. But beyond their practical applications, these organisms serve as living proof that life is far more creative and resilient than we ever imagined. Every time we think we've found the limits of what biology can accomplish, organisms like these politely remind us that we're still thinking far too small. They've taught us that extreme is often just a matter of perspective, and that conditions we consider impossible might be perfectly pleasant if you happen to have evolved the right molecular tools for the job. They've shown us that life doesn't just adapt to available environments, it actively seeks out new challenges and finds ways to thrive in places that seem designed to prevent existence itself. As we continue our journey through Earth's most impossible habitats, these fire-breathing organisms serve as perfect ambassadors for life's endless creativity. They've taken the fundamental requirement that proteins must maintain their structure to function and simply redesigned their proteins to function at temperatures that would destroy ordinary biological molecules. Next, we'll travel to the opposite extreme, to places so cold that ice becomes a permanent feature of the landscape, where other equally remarkable organisms have learned to call the freezer home. But for now, let yourself be warmed by the thought that somewhere in the crushing darkness of the deep ocean, countless tiny fire breathers are going about their daily business in water, hot enough to make tea, proof that life will always find a way to make the impossible seem routine. Picture yourself opening your freezer on a quiet morning, reaching past the ice cream and frozen vegetables to grab something from the back. As that familiar blast of cold air hits your face, you might notice how quickly your fingers start to tingle, how your breath forms little clouds, how everything in your body wants to retreat from that biting cold as quickly as possible. The temperature in there is probably around -18 degrees Celsius, cold enough to preserve food for months by essentially stopping all biological activity in its tracks. Now imagine temperatures twice as cold as that, then twice as cold again. Keep going until you reach the kind of cold that makes a home freezer seem tropical, where the very air would freeze the moisture in your lungs, and where exposed skin would suffer frostbite in seconds. In these conditions, so extreme that they exist mainly in the most remote corners of our planet, you might reasonably expect to find nothing but sterile ice and the kind of absolute silence that comes with the complete absence of life. You would be wonderfully, spectacularly wrong. In these frozen realms that seem designed to forbid existence itself, some of Earth's most remarkable residents have not only found ways to survive, they've discovered how to thrive with a contentment that would make a polar bear jealous. These are the Extremophiles, the cold lovers, organisms that have looked at conditions that would kill most life forms in minutes and decided that this is exactly where they'd like to raise their families. The story of how we discovered these impossible Ice Age survivors reads like something from an adventure novel, filled with intrepid scientists venturing into some of the most hostile environments on Earth and finding life where no life should exist. One of the most remarkable of these discoveries happened in a place that's often called the closest thing to Mars that you can visit without leaving Earth, the Antarctic dry valleys. Picture, if you will, a landscape so alien that when NASA was looking for places to test equipment for Mars missions, this is where they came. The dry valleys are a collection of snow-free valleys in Antarctica, where the combination of cold, wind and dryness creates conditions so harsh that they make the rest of Antarctica look welcoming by comparison. The temperatures here regularly drop to minus 50 degrees Celsius, with winds that can reach 200 kilometers per hour. The air is so dry that any snow or ice that manages to form is immediately sublimated, turned directly from solid to gas without ever becoming liquid. For decades, scientists assumed these valleys were completely sterile. The conditions seemed so hostile to life that early researchers didn't even bother looking for organisms there. It was rather like assuming that the inside of a blast furnace would be empty of life. The environment seemed so obviously lethal that investigation seemed pointless. But in the 1970s, a few curious researchers decided to take a closer look, and what they found challenged every assumption about the lower limits of life. Hidden within the rocks themselves, in tiny spaces between mineral crystals, were thriving communities of bacteria that had made themselves perfectly at home in conditions that would have seemed impossible for any living thing. These endolithic organisms, literally inside rock dwellers, had discovered something remarkable. If the outside world is too harsh for comfort, you simply move inside something that provides better conditions. The rocks protect them from the worst of the wind and provide just enough insulation to make survival possible. It's rather like finding people who have learned to live quite comfortably inside walk-in freezers, having figured out how to make the impossible seem routine. But the truly amazing thing about these organisms isn't just that they survive in such conditions, it's how slowly and patiently they live their lives. In the extreme cold, their metabolism slows to a crawl that makes a sleepy tortoise look hyperactive. Some of these bacterial communities are estimated to divide only once every 100 years or so. They're living their lives in what amounts to geological time, where a single generation might span multiple human lifetimes. Think about that for a moment. These organisms are so perfectly adapted to their frozen world that they've essentially become living fossils, maintaining themselves across centuries with the kind of patience that humans can barely comprehend. They represent a completely different approach to existence, not the frantic activity of warm weather life, but a kind of meditative persistence that treats time itself as an abundant resource. The mechanisms that allow these organisms to function at such extreme temperatures are marvels of biological engineering. Their cell membranes contain special lipids that remain fluid even at temperatures that would turn ordinary membranes into something resembling frozen plastic. It's rather like having antifreeze built into every cell, keeping the essential machinery of life running smoothly, even when everything around them is locked in ice. Many of these cold-loving organisms also produce what scientists call cryoprotectant proteins, molecules that act like biological antifreeze, preventing ice crystals from forming inside their cells. These proteins are so effective that they can keep cellular fluids liquid at temperatures well below the normal freezing point of water. Some Antarctic fish have similar adaptations, swimming quite comfortably in water that's technically below the freezing point of their body fluids. The discovery of thriving microbial communities in Antarctica's most hostile environments led scientists to wonder what other frozen realms might be harboring unexpected life. They turned their attention to glacial ice itself, those massive rivers of frozen water that seem about as hospitable to life as the surface of a comet. What they found was another wonderful surprise. Glacial ice isn't the sterile environment it appears to be. It's home to specialized bacterial communities that have learned to make a living in the spaces between ice crystals and in tiny pockets of liquid water that persist even in frozen ice. These organisms survive by breaking down organic compounds that get trapped in the ice, essentially living off the accumulated debris of thousands of years of falling snow and dust. Some of the most remarkable of these ice dwellers have been found in ice cores, drilled from deep within glaciers and ice sheets. Scientists have extracted living bacteria from ice that's over 400,000 years old, organisms that were frozen when early humans were just beginning to discover fire, and which have remained viably suspended in animation through multiple ice ages. The implications of this discovery are staggering. These organisms aren't just surviving in ice, they're essentially immortal as long as the ice remains frozen. They've found a way to pause their lives indefinitely, waiting out geological ages with the kind of patience that makes centuries seem like brief naps. When researchers carefully thaw samples of this ancient ice under laboratory conditions, the bacteria wake up and resume their activities as if no time had passed at all. It's rather like discovering a library of living books, each one preserving not just information but actual life from Earth's distant past. These ice-entombed organisms are living time capsules, carrying genetic information and biochemical capabilities from periods when our planet was very different from what it is today. The study of these Ice Age immortals has revealed fascinating insights into how life deals with the challenge of water turning solid. Ice formation is one of the most serious threats that cold-loving organisms face, because ice crystals can puncture cell membranes and disrupt the delicate structures that life depends on. But many psychrophiles have developed sophisticated strategies for managing this problem. Some produce special proteins that control how ice crystals form, ensuring that any ice that does develop grows in ways that don't damage cellular structures. Others have learned to live with ice formation, allowing parts of their bodies to freeze, while keeping essential processes running in protected areas that remain liquid. It's like having a house where some rooms are allowed to freeze solid in winter, while the crucial areas, the kitchen, the bedroom, the places where real life happens, are kept just warm enough for normal activities. These adaptations have inspired researchers working on everything from organ preservation for transplant surgery to developing better antifreeze compounds for industrial applications. The strategies that allow bacteria to survive in permanent ice are being adapted to help human technology work better in extreme cold conditions. But perhaps the most remarkable cold-loving environments are found beneath the ice sheets of Antarctica, in subglacial lakes that have been hidden from the surface world for millions of years. Lake Vostok, buried beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ice, represents one of the most isolated ecosystems on Earth. This lake has been cut off from surface conditions for at least 15 million years, creating a time capsule environment where evolution has been proceeding in complete isolation. When scientists first drilled down to sample Lake Vostok's waters, they were essentially opening a biological time capsule that predated human evolution by millions of years. The organisms they found there represent evolutionary lineages that have been developing in isolation longer than humans have existed as a species. It's like discovering a lost continent where life has been following completely different evolutionary paths for geological ages. The water in these subglacial lakes remains liquid despite being well below the normal freezing point, kept fluid by the immense pressure of the ice above and by geothermal heat from the Earth's interior. The organisms living in these dark, cold, pressurized environments have had to solve multiple extreme conditions simultaneously. Not just cold, but also complete darkness, high pressure, and isolation from any external source of nutrients. These subglacial communities survive by recycling the same nutrients over and over again for millions of years, creating closed-loop ecosystems that are entirely self-sustaining. They've essentially created their own private planets beneath the ice, complete ecosystems that operate according to their own rules and have no contact with the surface world above. The mythology and folklore of polar peoples contain surprisingly accurate intuitions about life, persisting through extreme cold and long periods of dormancy. Inuit stories speak of spirits that sleep through the long Arctic winter and awaken with the return of the sun. Norse mythology describes Ragnarok, the winter that ends the world, followed by renewal and the emergence of new life from hidden refuges where it had been preserved through the catastrophe. These stories capture something essential about the strategy that many cold-loving organisms have adopted, the ability to essentially pause their lives during difficult periods and resume them when conditions improve. It's a form of biological time travel where organisms can skip over the worst times and emerge into better conditions as if no time had passed at all. Buddhist and Hindu traditions speak of deep meditation states where time seems to stop and awareness persists in a kind of suspended animation. The organisms living in ice and extreme cold have achieved something remarkably similar, a state of minimal activity that allows them to persist through conditions that would be impossible for active life. The discovery of life thriving in Earth's most frozen environments has completely changed our understanding of where life might exist elsewhere in the solar system. The icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn, once dismissed as frozen wastelands, are now considered some of the most promising places to search for extraterrestrial life. If organisms can thrive in Antarctica's ice sheets and subglacial lakes, then perhaps similar communities could exist in the hidden oceans beneath the ice shells of Europa, Enceladus, and other distant worlds. These discoveries have also revealed something profound about the nature of time in biological systems. While most life we're familiar with operates on timescales of days, weeks, or at most decades, these cold-adapted organisms live on timescales that span geological ages. They've found ways to make survival strategies work across periods so long that entire mountain ranges could rise and erode during a single organism's lifetime. The practical implications of studying these Ice Age immortals extend far beyond basic science. Understanding how organisms survive long-term freezing has applications for everything from food preservation to space travel. The strategies that allow bacteria to remain viable in ice for hundreds of thousands of years could inform techniques for preserving biological materials for extended periods. Some researchers are even investigating whether the dormancy strategies used by these organisms could be adapted for human applications. The ability to essentially pause biological processes and resume them later could revolutionize everything from medical treatment to space exploration, where long journeys might require some form of suspended animation. But perhaps most importantly, these organisms remind us that life's creativity extends far beyond the warm, comfortable conditions that most familiar organisms prefer. They've shown us that even the most seemingly hostile environments can become home to thriving communities if you have enough time to develop the right adaptations. The Extremophiles living in Earth's frozen realms represent a completely different philosophy of existence, one based on patience, efficiency, and the defined opportunity in conditions that seem designed to prevent life entirely. They've learned to treat time as an ally rather than an enemy, to work with ice rather than fighting against it, and to find ways to thrive in environments where most life would see only impossibility. As we prepare to continue our journey through Earth's most extreme environments, these Ice Age immortals serve as perfect examples of life's ability to redefine what we mean by habitable. They've taken conditions that seem absolutely hostile to life and turned them into comfortable homes where they can pursue their quiet activities across geological ages. Next, we'll travel to places where the very chemistry of the environment seems designed to dissolve anything that dares to exist there. the acid baths and caustic pools where other remarkable organisms have learned to find comfort in conditions that would melt metal. But for now, let yourself be amazed by the thought that somewhere in Antarctica's deepest ice, organisms that were alive when your ancestors were discovering fire are patiently waiting for the right moment to resume their ancient activities. Proof that life's patience extends far beyond anything humans have ever imagined. Imagine accidentally spilling a drop of lemon juice on your skin. That mild sting you feel is your body's gentle reminder that acids, even weak ones, aren't particularly kind to living tissue. Now picture splashing vinegar in your eye, or the way your mouth puckers when you bite into something truly sour. These everyday encounters with mild acidity give us a tiny glimpse into why most living things treat acidic environments with the same enthusiasm they'd show for swimming in molten lava. Your stomach, clever organ that it is, produces hydrochloric acid strong enough to dissolve metal, but it has to protect itself with a thick layer of mucus to avoid digesting itself in the process. Even with this protection, your stomach lining replaces itself every few days, a constant battle against the corrosive environment it creates to break down your food. This gives you some sense of just how hostile acidic conditions can be to the delicate chemistry that keeps living things alive. So when I tell you that there are organisms on our planet living quite comfortably in environments more acidic than car battery fluid, conditions that would dissolve a penny in hours and eat through most metals like they were made of butter, you might reasonably assume I've been reading too much science fiction before bedtime. But scattered across our planet, in places that look more like alien chemistry laboratories than earthly environments, there are communities of organisms that have not only learned to survive in these impossibly corrosive conditions, they've decided that battery acid is exactly the kind of neighborhood where they'd like to raise their families. Welcome to the world of the acidophiles, the acid lovers, organisms so perfectly adapted to extreme acidity that they would literally die if you tried to give them the kind of clean, neutral water that you use to brush your teeth each morning. One of the most remarkable of these chemical extremists lives in a place that sounds like it was named by someone with a very dark sense of humor. Iron Mountain in Northern California. Now, despite its rather mundane name, Iron Mountain has earned the distinction of being home to some of the most acidic natural waters ever discovered on Earth. We're talking about springs and streams with pH levels around 0. Conditions so acidic they make pure lemon juice seem mild by comparison. The story of how Iron Mountain became such an inhospitable place is itself rather fascinating. This area was heavily mined for copper, silver and gold for over a century, and all that mining exposed vast amounts of iron sulfide minerals to air and water. When these minerals oxidize, they create sulfuric acid, the same stuff you'd find in a car battery, but occurring naturally and in concentrations that would make a chemistry teacher's hair stand on end. For most of the 20th century, scientists assumed that the acidic waters flowing from Iron Mountain were the result of purely chemical processes, just rocks and water and oxygen, combining in ways that happened to create an environment hostile to all life. It seemed so obviously lethal to biological systems that no one bothered to look for living organisms there. It was rather like assuming that the inside of a jar of sulfuric acid would be empty of life. The environment seemed so clearly designed to prevent existence that investigation seemed pointless. But in the 1990s, some curious researchers decided to take a closer look, and what they found was another one of those wonderful moments when life casually demolishes our assumptions about what should be possible. The acidic waters of Iron Mountain weren't sterile chemical solutions. They were home to thriving communities of bacteria and archaea that had made themselves perfectly comfortable in conditions acidic enough to dissolve most metals. These remarkable organisms weren't just tolerating the extreme acidity, they were actually responsible for creating it. They were feeding on the iron and sulfur in the rocks, using the energy released by these chemical reactions to power all the processes of life, and producing sulfuric acid as a byproduct of their metabolism. It was rather like discovering that what you thought was a natural chemical disaster was actually a bustling microbial city, with the residents cheerfully going about their daily business while producing industrial-strength acid as a side effect of their normal activities. One of the stars of this impossibly acidic ecosystem is an organism with the wonderfully dramatic name Metallosphera sedula, which translates roughly to busy metal sphere. This little archaeon lives quite contentedly in environments with a pH around 2, about as acidic as pure lemon juice, and it makes its living by literally eating rocks. It extracts energy by oxidizing sulfur and iron compounds, essentially breathing metals the way we breathe oxygen. But M. sedula's party trick isn't just surviving in acid, it's thriving at temperatures that would make most organisms very uncomfortable. This organism prefers conditions around 75 degrees Celsius, which means it's living in what amounts to very hot, very acidic soup. Imagine a hot tub filled with vinegar, then make it several times more acidic and quite a bit hotter, and you're approaching the conditions that M. sedula considers ideal for a relaxing afternoon. The biochemistry that allows these organisms to function in such corrosive environments is nothing short of miraculous. Their cell walls are reinforced with special compounds that can withstand constant acid attack, rather like having armor made of materials that are specifically designed to resist chemical warfare. Inside their cells, they maintain careful pH balance by actively pumping protons, hydrogen ions, across their membranes, creating a less acidic internal environment while living in external conditions that would dissolve most biological molecules. It's rather like having a submarine that can operate in an ocean of acid, with sophisticated systems for keeping the interior environment safe and habitable, while the outside world remains utterly hostile to normal life. These organisms have essentially learned to live inside their own personal protective bubbles, maintaining the delicate chemistry of life, while surrounded by conditions that should make existence impossible. The discovery of life thriving in such acidic conditions led scientists to explore other extremely acidic environments around the world, and what they found was a pattern that was becoming delightfully familiar. Wherever conditions seemed too extreme for life, life had found a way to make itself at home. Rio Tinto, a river in southwestern Spain, flows bright red and orange from the acidic, metal-rich water that gives it its name, Red River. For centuries, people assumed this colourful waterway was simply the result of chemical processes, a natural curiosity with no biological significance. But when scientists began studying Rio Tinto more carefully, they discovered that the river's distinctive colours come from the activities of acid-loving microorganisms that have been quietly going about their business there for thousands of years. These organisms aren't just surviving in Rio Tinto's acidic waters, they're actively shaping the river's chemistry and appearance. Different species of acidophiles create different colours as they process various metals, turning the river into a flowing artwork painted by communities of organisms that find beauty in conditions most life would consider toxic. The European Space Agency became so interested in Rio Tinto that they began using it as an analogue for what ancient Mars might have looked like. The combination of acidic water, high metal content, and specialized microbial communities creates an environment that might be remarkably similar to conditions that existed on the red planet billions of years ago, when it had liquid water and a thicker atmosphere. But perhaps the most impressive acid-loving environments are found in places where human industrial activity has accidentally created conditions even more extreme than nature typically produces. Acid mine drainage sites, where water flowing through abandoned mines picks up massive concentrations of sulfuric acid and toxic metals, create environments so hostile that they seem designed to prevent any form of life. These industrial accident sites, with pH levels that can drop below 1, more acidic than stomach acid, should be biological dead zones. Instead, they've become unexpected laboratories where acid-loving organisms are conducting their own experiments in extreme biochemistry. Some of these sites support microbial communities that are more diverse and active than those found in much more pleasant environments. It's one of those wonderful ironies of biology. Human industrial activity, in its attempts to extract useful materials from the Earth, has accidentally created some of the most extreme environments on the planet, only to discover that life has beaten us there and is already making itself comfortable in conditions we created by accident. The organisms living in these accidental acid baths have practical applications that extend far beyond satisfying scientific curiosity. The ability to function in highly acidic, metal-rich environments makes these organisms valuable partners in what's called biomining, using living organisms to extract metals from low-grade ores. Instead of using harsh chemical processes to separate metals from rock, we can essentially employ bacteria to do the work for us, creating more environmentally friendly mining techniques. Some acidophiles are being investigated for their potential to clean up contaminated sites, breaking down toxic compounds and neutralizing acidic conditions that would otherwise persist for decades. Others produce enzymes that remain stable in acidic conditions, finding applications in industrial processes that require chemical reactions in corrosive environments. The mythology and folklore of many cultures contain surprisingly accurate intuitions about transformation and purification through exposure to harsh, corrosive forces. Alchemical traditions spoke of subjecting materials to increasingly aggressive chemical treatments to achieve transmutation and purification. The idea that profound change could emerge from exposure to seemingly destructive forces appears in spiritual traditions around the world. Medieval alchemists were particularly fascinated with acids and their transformative properties. They called sulfuric acid oil of vitriol and believed it possessed almost magical powers of transformation. While their theories about transmuting base metals into gold were mistaken, their intuition that acids could be agents of profound change was remarkably accurate. The acidophiles living in environments more corrosive than anything medieval alchemists could create are indeed performing their own forms of transmutation, converting simple rock into complex biological molecules. Hindu and Buddhist traditions speak of purification through difficult experiences, the idea that spiritual development often requires passing through conditions that seem hostile to comfort and ease. The organisms thriving in Earth's most acidic environments have achieved something remarkably similar. They've found ways to use apparently destructive conditions as sources of energy and opportunity. Greek mythology tells of heroes who had to pass through various trials and tribulations, often involving exposure to seemingly impossible conditions, to achieve transformation and wisdom. The acidophiles have accomplished something similar, using conditions that would be lethal to most life as the foundation for their own unique forms of existence. The study of acid-loving organisms has also revealed fascinating insights into the early history of life on Earth. Many scientists now believe that the earliest forms of life may have evolved in environments that were much more acidic than the neutral conditions most familiar organisms prefer. The early Earth's atmosphere contained very little oxygen, but was rich in sulfur compounds and other chemicals that would create acidic conditions when mixed with water. This suggests that our comfortable neutral pH world is actually a relatively recent innovation in the history of biology. The pleasant conditions that humans and most familiar animals enjoy may represent a specialized niche that emerged only after billions of years of evolution in much harsher chemical environments. From this perspective, the acidophiles aren't strange adaptations to unusual conditions. They're the descendants of Earth's original residents, still carrying on the ancient traditions of life in chemical environments that predate the more moderate conditions we're familiar with. They're living links to our planet's more chemically adventurous past, when life had to be far more creative about where it could find energy and materials. The discovery of organisms thriving in extremely acidic conditions has also expanded our understanding of where life might exist elsewhere in the solar system. Venus, with its sulfuric acid clouds and surface conditions hot enough to melt lead, was once considered completely hostile to any form of life. But the discovery of acidophiles that thrive in conditions approaching those found in Venus's atmosphere has led some scientists to speculate about the possibility of aerial life forms floating in the planet's acid clouds. Similarly, some of Jupiter's moons have subsurface environments that may be quite acidic due to various chemical processes. The fact that life can thrive in battery acid on Earth suggests that these acidic alien environments might not be as hostile to biology as we once assumed. The practical implications of studying these acid bath survivors extend into fields ranging from biotechnology to environmental remediation. Understanding how organisms maintain their cellular integrity in highly corrosive environments has applications for developing better materials for industrial use in harsh chemical conditions. Some researchers are investigating whether the protective mechanisms used by acidophiles could be adapted to help preserve biological materials in challenging environments. The strategies that allow bacteria to maintain their cellular machinery in sulfuric acid might inform techniques for protecting sensitive biological compounds during industrial processing. But perhaps most importantly, these organisms remind us once again that life's creativity extends far beyond our comfortable assumptions about what living things require. They've shown us that even the most chemically aggressive environments can become home to thriving communities if you have the right molecular tools for the job. The acidophiles living in Earth's most corrosive environments represent yet another example of life's ability to turn apparent impossibility into comfortable routine. They've taken conditions that seem designed to dissolve anything that dares to exist, and turned them into productive homes where they can pursue their own unique forms of biochemistry. The acidophiles living in Earth's most corrosive environments represent yet another reminder of life's remarkable adaptability. They've learned to treat chemical aggression as a resource rather than a threat, to work with corrosive forces rather than fighting against them. These acid bath survivors have transformed conditions that seem designed to dissolve anything that dares to exist into comfortable homes, where they can pursue their own unique forms of biochemistry. Let yourself be amazed by the thought that somewhere on our planet right now, organisms are going about their daily business in water more acidic than car battery fluid, treating industrial-strength sulfuric acid like a refreshing swim on a summer day. They remind us that life's chemical creativity truly knows no bounds, and that even the most hostile-seeming environments can become someone's perfect neighborhood if you happen to have evolved the right molecular tools for the job. Think about the last time you dove to the bottom of a swimming pool, perhaps just a few meters below the surface. You probably felt that familiar sensation building in your ears, that gentle but insistent reminder that water, for all its apparent lightness, actually weighs quite a lot when there's enough of it above you. Even in a shallow pool, just a couple of meters down, you can feel the difference. That subtle squeeze that makes you want to pop your ears and head back to the surface where breathing feels natural again. Now imagine Instead of swimming back up for air, you somehow kept sinking. Picture yourself descending not just a few meters, but thousands upon thousands through mile after mile of crushing water, past depths where your lungs would collapse like deflated balloons, past levels where the water itself becomes so dense it barely seems like water anymore. Keep going down through darkness so complete that the very concept of light becomes a distant memory, until you reach pressures so extreme they could compress a car into something the size of a dinner plate. In these crushing depths, where the weight of the entire ocean presses down with a force that would make Atlas himself cry for mercy, you might reasonably expect to find nothing but empty darkness and the kind of absolute silence that comes with the complete absence of anything living. The pressure alone should be enough to turn any biological material into something resembling very expensive paste. But here's where our story takes another one of those delightful turns that makes you wonder if the universe has a mischievous sense of humour about human assumptions. In these deepest reaches of our planet's oceans, where the pressure is so intense it defies comfortable description, entire neighbourhoods of organisms have decided that crushing depths are exactly the kind of place they'd like to call home. Meet the piezophiles, the pressure lovers of organisms that don't just tolerate the kind of pressure that would instantly flatten most life forms, but actually require it to survive. They're rather like people who can only sleep soundly under a pile of heavy blankets, except their heavy blankets happen to be several miles of ocean water, pressing down with the force of 1,000 elephants, sitting on every square inch of their bodies. The story of how we discovered these impossible communities reads like the plot of a science fiction adventure, complete with brave explorers venturing into truly alien territory that happened to be hidden right here on our own planet. For most of human history, the deepest parts of our oceans were more mysterious than the surface of Mars. We were sending people to the moon while the deepest trenches of our own planet remained as unknown and inaccessible as the far side of Jupiter. The Mariana Trench, that great crescent-shaped wound in the Pacific Ocean floor, represents the deepest known point on Earth's surface. At its deepest spot, a place called Challenger Deep, with a name that seems almost comically appropriate. The ocean floor lies nearly 11 kilometers below sea level. To put that in perspective, if you could somehow drop Mount Everest into this trench, the mountain's peak would still be over a kilometer underwater, like a person trying to touch the ceiling of a room while standing in a swimming pool several stories deep. The pressure down there is so extreme that describing it in normal terms becomes almost meaningless. We're talking about roughly 1,100 times the atmospheric pressure you're experiencing right now. If you could somehow find yourself at that depth without protection, the pressure would compress your entire body to roughly the size of a grape in the time it takes to blink. The water itself becomes so dense under this crushing force that it starts behaving like something closer to liquid metal than anything you'd recognize as the stuff you use to brush your teeth. For decades, scientists looked at these conditions and made what seemed like a perfectly reasonable assumption. Nothing could possibly survive down there. The logic was impeccable. Life depends on delicate molecular machinery, and crushing pressure should disrupt this machinery just as surely as throwing a Swiss watch into a hydraulic press. The proteins that do most of the work in living cells need to maintain very specific three-dimensional shapes to function, and pressure should squeeze these shapes into uselessness, like trying to fold origami while someone jumps up and down on your paper. But then, in the 1960s, humans developed the technology to actually visit these crushing depths, and what they found was another one of those wonderful moments when life casually demolished human assumptions about what should be possible. The deepest parts of the ocean weren't sterile pressure chambers. They were home to bustling communities of organisms that had not only learned to survive under crushing pressure, but had evolved to require it for their happiness and well-being. Many of these pressure-loving organisms literally cannot survive at normal atmospheric pressure. If you bring them to the surface, where the pressure is more than 1,000 times lower than what they're accustomed to, they essentially explode from the inside out as their cellular machinery, perfectly designed for high-pressure operation, fails catastrophically in what they must experience as the impossibly thin conditions at sea level. It's rather like discovering a group of people who are so perfectly adapted to living at the bottom of the ocean that they can't survive in normal air, beings for whom our comfortable surface conditions would be as instantly lethal as their crushing depths would be to us. Imagine trying to explain to them that most life forms consider their neighbourhood uninhabitable, when to them it's the surface world that seems impossibly hostile and strange. The mechanisms that allow these organisms to function under such extreme pressure read like something from a very creative engineer's notebook. Their proteins are reinforced with extra chemical bonds that help them maintain their shape even when subjected to forces that would crush ordinary biological molecules into submission. It's like building a house that's not just earthquake resistant, but actually requires earthquakes to keep its walls properly aligned. Their cell membranes are equally remarkable feats of biological engineering. While normal cell membranes would be compressed into complete uselessness under such extreme conditions, these pressure-adapted membranes contain special lipids that actually become more functional as pressure increases. It's rather like having a balloon that gets stronger and more flexible the harder you squeeze it, completely defying common sense about how materials should behave under stress. Perhaps most remarkably, some of these deep-sea organisms have learned to use pressure itself as a tool. They have enzymes, those molecular machines that speed up chemical reactions, that actually require high pressure to function properly. These pressure-activated enzymes are so specialized for their extreme environment that they become completely inactive if the pressure drops below their minimum operating threshold. It's like having a car engine that only runs properly when you're driving uphill and stalls out completely on level ground. The discovery of life thriving under crushing pressure led scientists to wonder about another extreme environment that shares similar conditions, the deep interior of the Earth itself. Miles beneath the surface, in tiny spaces between rock particles and in microscopic cracks within solid stone, pressures approach those found in the deepest ocean trenches. And sure enough, researchers found life there too, quietly going about its business in conditions that should make existence impossible. These deep subsurface communities represent some of the most isolated ecosystems on our planet. Some have been cut off from surface conditions for millions of years, surviving on chemical energy extracted from reactions between rock and water. They live in what amounts to liquid-filled spaces within the solid Earth, under pressures that would instantly flatten surface-dwelling organisms, and in conditions so remote they might as well be living on a different planet entirely. The organisms in these underground environments have had to solve multiple impossible problems simultaneously. Not only do they deal with crushing pressure, but also scorching heat from the Earth's internal furnace, complete darkness that makes midnight look bright, and resources so limited that a convenience store would seem like a cornucopia by comparison. They represent life operating at the very edge of what chemistry can accomplish when faced with such overwhelming challenges. Some of these deep crustal organisms live so slowly that their metabolism makes a hibernating turtle look like it's in a frantic hurry. Under the extreme pressure and limited resources of their underground homes, they may reproduce only once every 1,000 years or more. They've essentially learned to live in geological time, treating millennia the way surface organisms treat the changing seasons. What's particularly fascinating about pressure-loving life is how it reveals that pressure, unlike heat or acid, doesn't necessarily destroy biological molecules, it just changes how they work. At extreme pressures, water itself starts behaving differently, becoming denser and more viscous, and developing properties that can actually help stabilize certain biological structures. Some proteins actually become more stable under high pressure, as if the crushing environment helps hold their complex shapes together more effectively than normal conditions would. It's rather like discovering that some people actually think more clearly when they're under tremendous stress, functioning better when the pressure is on than they do during calm, relaxed periods. These organisms have found ways to use crushing force as a support system rather than an obstacle. Ancient stories from cultures around the world contain surprisingly accurate intuitions about life existing in the deep places of the earth and about transformation that occurs under pressure. Mining folklore often describes strange encounters with unusual forms of life in the deepest shafts and tunnels. These stories, dismissed as superstition by people who never ventured underground, turn out to contain remarkable wisdom about the hidden biosphere that exists in the planet's most remote places. Underground mythologies speak of entire worlds existing beneath the surface, realms where different rules apply and impossible things become commonplace. The Greek concept of an underworld that's both a place of death and a source of precious metals captures something essential about the deep earth. It seems hostile to surface life, but is actually teeming with its own forms of existence. The discovery of pressure-loving organisms has also completely changed how we think about the possibility of life elsewhere in the solar system. The hidden oceans beneath the ice shells of Jupiter's Europa and Saturn's Enceladus experience pressures similar to those found in Earth's deepest trenches. The fact that life can thrive under such crushing conditions has transformed these distant, ice-covered worlds from frozen wastelands into some of the most promising places to search for extraterrestrial life. The practical applications of studying these pressure-adapted organisms extend into fields that seem almost science-fictional. Understanding how biological systems function under extreme pressure has informed everything from the design of deep-sea exploration equipment to food preservation techniques that use pressure instead of heat to eliminate harmful microorganisms while preserving nutrients. Some researchers are even investigating whether the pressure adaptation strategies used by these organisms might be applicable to human medicine. Understanding how these creatures maintain their cellular functions under crushing pressure might lead to better treatments for conditions like decompression sickness or improved techniques for medical procedures that involve changes in pressure. But perhaps most importantly, these pressure-loving organisms represent another powerful reminder that life's creativity extends far beyond our comfortable assumptions about what living things need to thrive. They've shown us that even the most physically challenging environments can become home to flourishing communities if evolution has enough time and creativity to develop the right solutions. The organisms living in Earth's most pressurized environments have learned to treat crushing force as a friend rather than an enemy. They've discovered ways to use conditions that would be instantly lethal to surface life as the foundation for their own unique forms of existence. In doing so, they've expanded our understanding of life's possibilities in ways that continue to surprise and delight researchers. These deep-dwelling pressure enthusiasts remind us that uninhabitable is often just another way of saying uninhabitable by us. What seems impossible from our perspective might be perfectly comfortable from theirs, and what we consider crushing adversity might be exactly the kind of neighborhood they prefer for raising their families and pursuing their microscopic dreams. Picture yourself sitting in a waiting room before getting a chest X-ray, perhaps reading one of those slightly outdated magazines, while a technician in a lead apron carefully positions a machine that will briefly flood your body with radiation. You might feel a tiny flutter of concern. After all, radiation is one of those invisible forces that humans have learned to treat with considerable respect. The technician steps behind a protective barrier, warns you to hold still, and for just a fraction of a second, high-energy particles stream through your body to create an image of your lungs. That brief exposure to medical radiation, carefully controlled and measured, represents more radiation than most living things encounter in their entire lifetimes. Your cells have sophisticated repair mechanisms to deal with the minor damage that radiation causes. But even so, medical professionals are careful to limit exposures and protect themselves behind lead shields. The message is clear: radiation and life don't generally get along very well. Now imagine radiation levels not just a little bit higher, but thousands of times higher. Picture environments where the air itself glows faintly blue from ionizing radiation, where the very atoms around you are being split apart by invisible forces, where a human would receive a lethal dose in minutes, and where most familiar forms of life would simply disintegrate at the molecular level. These are places where radiation is so intense that it seems designed to sterilize anything foolish enough to exist there. And yet, in these atomic wastelands that seem custom-built to prevent life entirely, some of Earth's most remarkable residents have not only learned to survive, they've discovered that radiation, that great destroyer of biological molecules, can actually be rather useful. They've figured out how to turn humanity's ultimate weapon against life into their own personal energy source. Welcome to the world of the radio-resistant organisms, creatures so perfectly adapted to high radiation environments that they make our most heroic fictional superheroes look like delicate flowers. These are organisms that can survive radiation doses thousands of times higher than what would kill a human, and some that have even learned to eat radiation for lunch. The poster child for this impossible group of organisms has a name that sounds like it was chosen by someone with a wonderful sense of humour: Deinococcus radiodurans. Scientists have nicknamed it Conan the bacterium, which gives you some sense of just how tough this little organism really is. Radiodurans can survive radiation doses that are literally thousands of times higher than what would be lethal to humans. Radiation so intense it would sterilize medical equipment and turn most organic matter into something resembling radioactive soup. To put this in perspective, a radiation dose that would kill a human in days and reduce most bacteria to molecular fragments is basically a pleasant afternoon for D. radiodurans. This organism treats radiation levels that would make a Geiger counter scream with alarm, as if they were gentle sunlight on a summer day. The discovery of D. radiodurans happened in one of those delightfully serendipitous ways that make scientific history so entertaining. In the 1950s, scientists were experimenting with using radiation to sterilize canned food. The idea being that you could blast the food with enough radiation to kill all bacteria while leaving the food itself intact. It seemed like a perfectly reasonable plan, and for the most part it worked beautifully. But then researchers started noticing that some cans of meat that had been subjected to supposedly sterilizing doses of radiation were still going bad. Something was surviving radiation levels that should have killed everything remotely biological. When they investigated what was causing the spoilage, they found D. radiodurans quietly going about its business in conditions that should have been the biological equivalent of a nuclear wasteland. It was rather like discovering someone not just surviving, but thriving in the middle of a nuclear reactor, cheerfully setting up house in conditions that would kill anything else in seconds. The researchers had inadvertently created an environment so hostile to life that only the most impossibly tough organisms could survive, and then been surprised when something actually did. The mechanisms that allow D-radiodurans to survive such extreme radiation are so remarkable they seem almost designed by a science fiction author with a very creative imagination. When radiation tears apart the organism's DNA, and it does, regularly and comprehensively, D-radiodurans simply puts it back together again. The organism has multiple copies of its entire genome and DNA repair systems so efficient they can rebuild completely shattered genetic material in a matter of hours. It's rather like having a jigsaw puzzle that can reassemble itself even after someone has thrown all the pieces into a blender, run the blender for several minutes, and then scattered the resulting fragments across multiple rooms. Somehow, D-radiodurans manages to find all the pieces and put them back together in exactly the right order, every single time. But D-radiodurans isn't the only organism that has decided radiation makes a perfectly pleasant neighborhood. In 1986, a nuclear accident at Chernobyl created what many people assumed would be a permanently sterilized zone, an area so contaminated with radioactive material that nothing would be able to live there for decades, or perhaps centuries. What actually happened was rather different, and far more wonderful than anyone expected. Within just a few years of the accident, researchers began noticing that life was not only returning to the exclusion zone around Chernobyl, it was flourishing there with an enthusiasm that seemed almost defiant. Plants were growing in the most contaminated areas, animals were returning in surprising numbers, and microorganisms were having what could only be described as a population explosion. Most remarkably, scientists discovered that some fungi growing in the ruins of the Chernobyl reactor itself weren't just tolerating the intense radiation. They appeared to be using it as an energy source. These radiotrophic fungi contain high concentrations of melanin, the same pigment that gives human skin its color and helps protect us from solar radiation. But these fungi seem to have figured out how to use melanin not just for protection, but as a kind of biological solar panel that can harvest energy from ionizing radiation. It's rather like discovering plants that have learned to photosynthesize using X-rays instead of sunlight, turning what should be a source of deadly damage into fuel for growth and reproduction. These fungi are essentially farming radiation, treating the contaminated environment around Chernobyl like a highly productive energy field. This discovery has led scientists to reconsider what we mean when we talk about uninhabitable environments. The exclusion zone around Chernobyl, which was supposed to be too dangerous for any life, has become a thriving wildlife preserve where animals roam freely and plants grow with vigor that would make any gardener envious. The absence of human activity has apparently been more beneficial to most organisms than the presence of radiation has been harmful. It's one of those wonderful ironies that make you wonder about the universe's sense of humor. Humanity's worst nuclear accident created conditions that many organisms find not just tolerable, but actually preferable to normal human-dominated environments. The exclusion zone has become an accidental paradise for wildlife, a place where radiation-resistant organisms can pursue their lives without interference from the species that created the contamination in the first place. The study of radio-resistant organisms has revealed that resistance to radiation is far more common in the natural world than anyone expected. Many organisms that live in environments with naturally high background radiation, such as high-altitude locations where cosmic radiation is more intense, or areas with naturally occurring radioactive minerals, have evolved sophisticated mechanisms for dealing with DNA damage and cellular disruption. Some of these organisms can survive radiation doses that would be lethal to most life forms, not because they're particularly exotic, but simply because they've had millions of years to develop effective repair mechanisms. It's rather like discovering that people who live in sunny climates naturally develop better protection against UV radiation, except in this case, we're talking about organisms that have learned to cope with radiation levels that would make nuclear engineers nervous. High-altitude bacteria, for instance, live in environments where cosmic radiation is much more intense than at sea level, and many of these organisms show remarkable resistance to radiation damage. They've developed molecular repair systems that can fix radiation-induced damage almost as quickly as it occurs, treating constant bombardment by high-energy particles as just another fact of life in their particular neighborhood. The discovery of radiation-eating organisms has also opened up fascinating possibilities for practical applications. Scientists are investigating whether these organisms could be used to help clean up radioactive contamination, essentially using biology to remediate environments that are too dangerous for conventional cleanup methods. Instead of trying to remove radioactive material through expensive and dangerous engineering projects, we might be able to employ organisms that would actually benefit from exposure to the contamination. Some researchers are even exploring whether radio-resistant organisms could be useful for space exploration, where radiation levels are much higher than anything encountered on Earth's surface. The mechanisms that allow these organisms to survive intense radiation might be adaptable to help protect human space travelers, or to create biological systems that could function in the high radiation environment of space. But perhaps the most profound implication of discovering radiation-resistant life is what it tells us about the resilience and creativity of biology itself. These organisms have taken one of the most destructive forces known to science, radiation that can tear apart the very molecules of life, and turned it into an opportunity. They've found ways to not just survive, but thrive in conditions that were specifically designed to sterilize biological material. Ancient mythologies often speak of life emerging from fire and destruction, of phoenixes rising from ashes and heroes gaining strength from trials that would destroy ordinary beings. The radio-resistant organisms living in Earth's most contaminated environments have accomplished something remarkably similar. They've learned to find nourishment in forces that seem designed to destroy life entirely. Nuclear age folklore and science fiction often imagined radiation as the ultimate destroyer, the force that would end all life and leave behind only sterile wastelands. The discovery of organisms that treat radiation as a resource rather than a threat has completely inverted this narrative. Instead of creating lifeless zones, nuclear contamination has accidentally created new ecological niches where radiation-adapted organisms can flourish. There's something almost poetic about the fact that humanity's most feared technology has become a source of opportunity for other forms of life. The same force that we've learned to harness for both energy and destruction has been quietly nurturing communities of organisms that see radiation not as a weapon, but as a gift. The implications for astrobiology are equally profound. Many environments in space that we've dismissed as too radioactive for life, the surface of Jupiter's moon Europa, where radiation from Jupiter's magnetic field would be lethal to most Earth life, or planets orbiting stars that emit high levels of radiation, might actually be quite hospitable to organisms with the right adaptations. The radio-resistant organisms of Earth have shown us that what we consider sterilizing levels of radiation might be perfectly comfortable for life forms that have evolved the appropriate molecular tools. They've expanded our understanding of the habitable zone around stars to include environments with radiation levels that would have seemed impossible for life just a few decades ago. These radiation warriors have also provided insights into the early history of life on Earth. The early Earth experienced much higher levels of radiation than the planet does today, both from cosmic sources and from naturally occurring radioactive elements. The ability to survive high radiation may not be an exotic adaptation at all, but rather a fundamental capability that many organisms developed during life's early history on a more radioactive planet. From this perspective, our modern sensitivity to radiation might be the real oddity, a consequence of evolving in an environment that became less radioactive over time, as many of the short-lived radioactive elements present during Earth's formation decayed away. The radiation-resistant organisms might be carrying on ancient traditions of life in high-radiation environments, traditions that predate our more radiation-sensitive forms of biology. The organisms thriving in Earth's most radioactive environments represent another testament to life's incredible adaptability and creativity. They've taken conditions that seem designed to prevent existence entirely and turned them into thriving communities where radiation becomes just another resource to be harvested and used. These atomic age survivors remind us that even our most destructive technologies often create new opportunities for life to explore and colonize. They've shown us that the boundaries between life and death, between habitable and uninhabitable, are far more fluid than we often assume. What seems like an ending to us might be a beginning for other forms of life, and what we consider our greatest failures might become someone else's greatest opportunities. In the quiet zones around nuclear facilities and in the contaminated landscapes of former weapons testing sites, radiation-resistant organisms continue to pursue their lives with the same determined creativity that has characterized life throughout Earth's history. They remind us that life's ingenuity extends far beyond our ability to predict or control it, and that even our attempts to create sterile, lifeless environments often end up nurturing new forms of biological innovation instead. Think about the last time you felt truly hungry. Perhaps you'd skipped breakfast, missed lunch, and suddenly realized it was late afternoon, and your stomach was making those polite but insistent noises that remind you that your body runs on fuel, just like any other biological machine. Maybe you felt a little lightheaded, perhaps slightly irritable, definitely focused on the prospect of your next meal. Most humans start feeling uncomfortable after missing just 1 or 2 meals, and our entire civilization is built around the assumption that living things need regular access to food, water, and energy. Now, imagine going not just hours or days without food, but years, decades. Imagine organisms that have learned to live so efficiently that they can survive on resources so scarce they make a desert seem like a feast. Picture life forms that have figured out how to extract energy from sources so minimal that they make sunlight and organic matter seem like lavish luxury resources that only the most extravagant organisms could afford to depend upon. These aren't organisms clinging desperately to existence on the edge of starvation. No, these are the hunger artists of the biological world, creatures that have perfected the art of living on almost nothing and have discovered that when you learn to survive on virtually no resources at all, the entire planet becomes your potential home. Welcome to the world of the oligotrophs, whose name literally means few eaters. These are organisms that have looked at the basic requirements for life, food, water, energy, nutrients, and decided that most of these things are unnecessary luxuries. They've learned to thrive in environments so resource-poor that they make a barren wasteland look like a gourmet buffet. The champions of this minimalist approach to existence live in a place that has earned the distinction of being the most Mars-like environment on Earth, the Atacama Desert in Chile. If you wanted to design a landscape specifically to challenge every assumption about what life requires, you'd be hard-pressed to improve on what nature has created in the Atacama. Picture, if you will, A desert so dry that some weather stations there have never recorded rainfall. Not rarely recorded, never. Some areas of the Atacama haven't seen measurable precipitation in recorded human history. The soil is so devoid of organic matter that it makes moon dust look nutritious by comparison. The air is so thin and dry that it sucks moisture from any living thing brave enough to exist there. The ultraviolet radiation is so intense that it would give you a sunburn in minutes and sterilize most organic compounds in hours. For most of the 20th century, scientists looked at the Atacama and saw exactly what logic suggested they should see. Nothing. The place seemed so obviously hostile to life that early researchers didn't even bother looking for organisms there. It was classified as essentially sterile, a dead zone where the combination of drought, radiation, and chemical extremes had created conditions incompatible with any form of biology. But in the 1990s, some persistent researchers decided to take a very close look at what seemed like the most lifeless place on Earth. And what they discovered was another one of those delightful moments when life casually demonstrates that human assumptions about impossibility are often just failures of imagination. Hidden in the apparently sterile soil of the Atacama, researchers found microbial communities that had been quietly going about their business for who knows how long, completely indifferent to the fact that they were living in conditions that should have made existence impossible. These organisms had learned to survive on water so scarce that they essentially live in a state of permanent drought, on nutrients so limited that they make the most barren environments seem abundant, and on energy sources so minimal that they've redefined what it means to have enough. The mechanisms these Atacama residents use to survive read like a masterclass in biological efficiency. They've learned to extract every possible bit of moisture from the air, even when the humidity is so low that sophisticated instruments can barely detect it. They can enter states of dormancy so profound that they essentially pause their lives for years at a time, waiting patiently for the rare occasions when conditions improve enough to allow a few hours or days of active metabolism. Some of these organisms have been found living several meters beneath the surface, in soil so dry and nutrient-poor that it resembles sterilized sand more than anything that should support life. They survive by processing trace amounts of organic compounds that have somehow made their way into the subsurface, metabolizing these materials so slowly and efficiently that they can sustain themselves for decades on what other organisms would consume in days. It's rather like discovering people who have learned to live comfortably on a single grain of rice per year, not through starvation, but through having developed such efficient metabolisms that they simply don't need more. These organisms have essentially solved the problem of scarcity by redefining what constitutes adequate resources. But the Atacama's hunger artists aren't the only organisms that have mastered the art of living on almost nothing. Throughout the world, researchers have discovered oligotrophic communities in environments so resource-poor that they challenge our basic understanding of what life requires to sustain itself. Deep underground, in rock formations where nutrients are so scarce they're measured in parts per billion rather than percentages, communities of bacteria have learned to live by processing trace amounts of organic compounds that seep through solid rock over geological timescales. These organisms may go centuries between meals, sustaining themselves on chemical reactions so subtle that they barely register on our most sensitive instruments. Some of these subsurface communities have been cut off from surface conditions for millions of years, surviving entirely on the chemical energy they can extract from interactions between rock and water. They've created closed-loop ecosystems where every molecule is recycled endlessly, where waste from one organism becomes food for another, and where nothing is ever thrown away because there's simply nothing to spare. The deep ocean, too, hosts remarkable communities of ultra-efficient organisms. In the vast expanses between hydrothermal vents, where nutrients fall like sparse snow from the surface world far above, bacterial communities have learned to catch and process every possible bit of organic matter that drifts down to their dark realm. They've become biological vacuum cleaners, so efficient at capturing and using scarce resources that they can maintain active ecosystems in environments where the energy density is lower than what most organisms would consider starvation conditions. Perhaps most remarkably, some organisms have learned to live inside other organisms as endosymbionts, essentially becoming living components of their host's biology. These internal residents have given up the ability to live independently in exchange for a guaranteed, if minimal, supply of resources from their hosts. They've become so specialized for this ultra-efficient lifestyle that they've lost most of the genetic machinery required for independent existence, becoming living examples of the principle that if you don't need it, evolution will eventually take it away. Some of these endosymbiotic bacteria have become so integrated with their hosts that it's difficult to say where the bacterium ends and the host organism begins. They've essentially merged their biologies, creating composite organisms that are more efficient than either component could be on its own. It's rather like discovering that some people have learned to live so cooperatively that they've literally become parts of each other's bodies. The study of oligotrophic organisms has revealed that efficiency, not abundance, may be the key to biological success. These organisms have achieved something that seems almost impossible. They've learned to thrive while using resources so efficiently that they barely disturb the environments they inhabit. They're the biological equivalent of people who can live comfortably in a tiny house while consuming almost no energy and producing virtually no waste. Cave ecosystems provide some of the most extreme examples of oligotrophic life. In deep caverns where no sunlight has ever penetrated and where the only food sources are trace amounts of organic matter that seep in from the surface world, entire ecosystems have evolved to live on what amounts to biological scraps. These cave communities have learned to process every available molecule with such efficiency that they can support complex food webs on resources that would barely sustain a single organism in more abundant environments. The organisms living in these nutrient-starved caves have developed strategies that seem almost magical in their efficiency. Some have learned to dissolve limestone to extract trace nutrients, essentially eating the rocks they live on. Others have formed intricate partnerships where different species specialize in extracting different types of resources, creating community-wide efficiency systems that allow the entire ecosystem to survive on remarkably little. Ancient traditions of fasting and asceticism found in many cultures seem to reflect an intuitive understanding of the principle that oligotrophic organisms have mastered, that less can indeed be more, and that learning to need fewer resources can lead to greater freedom and resilience. Buddhist and Jain practices of minimal consumption, Hindu traditions of tapas or austerity, and various forms of mystical fasting all recognize that there's something powerful about learning to thrive while consuming very little. Desert nomadic cultures developed sophisticated techniques for surviving in environments where resources are scarce and unpredictable, learning to extract maximum benefit from minimal inputs and to store resources efficiently for lean times. These human strategies mirror remarkably closely the approaches that oligotrophic organisms have developed for surviving in resource-poor environments. The practical implications of studying these ultra-efficient organisms extend far beyond basic biology. understanding how life can persist with minimal resources has applications for everything, from designing more efficient agricultural systems to developing life support technologies for space exploration. If we can learn how these organisms maintain active metabolisms on virtually no resources, we might be able to create human technologies that operate with similar efficiency. Some researchers are investigating whether the efficiency strategies used by oligotrophic bacteria could be applied to biotechnology applications. Organisms that can function with minimal nutrients might be useful for industrial processes where resource costs are a major concern, or for environmental cleanup applications where expensive nutrients would make biological approaches economically unfeasible. The discovery of life thriving with minimal resources has also expanded our understanding of where life might exist elsewhere in the solar system. Many environments that we've dismissed as too resource-poor to support biology, the dry surfaces of Mars, the sparse atmospheres of outer planet moons, the nutrient-starved interiors of asteroids, might actually be quite hospitable to organisms that have mastered the art of living on almost nothing. These hunger artists have shown us that the boundaries of the habitable zone extend far beyond environments with abundant water, rich soils, and generous energy sources. They've demonstrated that life can persist and even thrive in conditions so sparse that they redefine what we mean by enough. The oligotrophic organisms scattered throughout Earth's most resource-poor environments represent a completely different philosophy of existence, one based on efficiency rather than abundance, conservation rather than consumption, and patience rather than rapid growth. They've learned to treat scarcity not as a problem to be solved, but as a design constraint that leads to more elegant and sustainable solutions. These minimal resource specialists remind us that life's greatest innovations often emerge not from luxury and abundance, but from the creative pressure of having to do more with less. They've shown us that even in environments where there seems to be nothing to live on, life finds ways to extract energy and nutrients from sources so subtle that we barely recognize them as resources at all. In a world increasingly concerned with sustainability and efficiency, these biological hunger artists offer lessons that extend far beyond scientific curiosity. They've mastered the art of living lightly on the earth, of finding abundance in apparent scarcity, and of thriving while consuming almost nothing. They remind us that sometimes the most profound solutions come not from having more, but from needing less. Imagine you're a scientist tasked with preparing for humanity's first encounter with extraterrestrial life. You sit down with a cup of coffee and a blank notebook, ready to compile everything we know about what alien organisms might look like, how they might behave, and where we should look for them. Where would you even begin such an impossibly vast task? For most of human history, our assumptions about alien life were rather like our assumptions about extremophiles. We imagined that anything living elsewhere in the universe would probably need conditions rather similar to what we find comfortable here on Earth. Alien planets in science fiction look remarkably like pleasant Earth environments, just perhaps with differently coloured skies or slightly unusual plants. Even our most creative writers seem to assume that life, wherever it might arise, would prefer temperatures like ours, atmospheres like ours, and chemistry like ours. But our journey through Earth's most impossible environments has revealed something rather wonderful. We've been living with aliens all along. Every organism we've met in these pages, from the fire-breathing bacteria of hydrothermal vents to the radiation-eating fungi of Chernobyl, represents a form of life so different from our comfortable assumptions that they might as well have arrived here on spacecraft from distant stars. These Earth-based extremophiles have become our best teachers about what alien life might actually look like, and the lessons they're teaching us are rewriting every assumption we've ever made about where life can exist and what forms it might take. Think about it this way. If you encountered Pyrococcus furiosus floating in a sample of alien ocean water, living happily at temperatures that would instantly sterilize everything familiar to human biology, would you hesitate to call it alien life? If you discovered Deinococcus radiodurans thriving in the radiation-blasted environment of a distant planet, wouldn't you consider it one of the most remarkable discoveries in the history of science? The fact that these organisms happen to share our planet doesn't make them any less alien in their fundamental nature. They've solved the basic problems of existence in ways so different from familiar life that they represent completely different experiments in what it means to be alive. Consider our old friend the Atacama Desert, that impossibly dry landscape that's become NASA's favourite testing ground for Mars exploration equipment. When space agencies want to understand what their rovers might encounter on the red planet, they don't send them to places that look like Earth's more hospitable environments. They send them to places like the Atacama, where the combination of extreme dryness, intense radiation, and sparse nutrients creates conditions that are as close to Mars as anywhere on our planet. And what have those tests revealed? That even in Earth's most Mars-like environment, life finds ways to persist and even thrive. The organisms living in the Atacama's subsurface are essentially practicing for life on Mars, demonstrating that even conditions we consider prohibitively harsh might be perfectly adequate for biology that's evolved the right adaptations. This discovery has completely revolutionized our approach to searching for life on Mars. Instead of looking only for environments that seem comfortable by Earth standards, we're now investigating places that seemed obviously sterile, underground aquifers where water might persist despite the planet's frozen surface, subsurface environments protected from radiation, ancient lake beds where extremophile communities might have persisted through billions of years of planetary climate change. The lessons from Earth's extremophiles extend far beyond Mars. Consider Europa, Jupiter's ice-covered moon with its hidden ocean trapped beneath miles of frozen crust. For decades, this seemed like an environment far too alien to support life, an ocean that never sees sunlight, trapped under crushing ice, bombarded by Jupiter's intense radiation field. But now, having met Earth's deep-sea pressure lovers and radiation warriors, Europa looks far more hospitable. We know that life can thrive in permanent darkness, powered by chemical energy rather than sunlight. We know that crushing pressure isn't necessarily a barrier to biology, but can actually become a resource for organisms that evolve the right adaptations. We know that radiation, rather than being purely destructive, can become an energy source for organisms with the appropriate biochemistry. Europa's subsurface ocean, once dismissed as too extreme for life, now ranks among the most promising places in our solar system to search for biology. The extremophiles of Earth have taught us to see alien promise where we once saw only impossibility. The same transformation has occurred in our thinking about Enceladus, Saturn's small ice moon that shoots geysers of subsurface water into space. Those geysers carry with them chemical signatures that suggest active geology beneath the ice, exactly the kind of chemical energy sources that power Earth's deep-sea vent communities. The fire-breathing bacteria we've discovered around Earth's hydrothermal vents have shown us that life can thrive in such environments, turning what seemed like a frozen wasteland into a potential biological paradise. Even more exotic environments are starting to look biologically possible. Titan, Saturn's largest moon, has lakes of liquid methane and ethane on its surface, hydrocarbons that are completely unlike the water-based chemistry that familiar life depends upon. But the hunger artists we've discovered on Earth, organisms that can survive on virtually any available chemical energy source, suggest that Titan's methane lakes might support forms of life based on entirely different chemistry. Venus, with its sulfuric acid clouds and surface temperatures hot enough to melt lead, was once considered absolutely hostile to any form of life. But the acid-loving organisms we've found thriving in Earth's most corrosive environments have led some scientists to speculate about the possibility of aerial biology floating in Venus's atmosphere, where temperatures and pressures might be more moderate, even though the chemistry remains extremely acidic. The Extremophiles have taught us that our definition of the habitable zone around stars, that comfortable range of distances where liquid water can exist, was far too narrow. Life doesn't just need liquid water, it needs energy and chemical resources. And as Earth's Extremophiles have shown us, these resources can be found in places that seem completely hostile to familiar biology. Planets that are tidally locked to their stars, with one side permanently facing the star and the other in eternal darkness, might host life adapted to those extreme temperature differences. Planets bombarded with radiation from active stellar flares might support radiation-resistant organisms that treat such conditions as perfectly normal. Worlds with atmospheres so thin that liquid water can't exist on the surface might harbour subsurface communities that thrive in the interface between rock and what little water vapour is available. Each extremophile we've discovered on Earth has expanded the map of where we might find life elsewhere. Every impossible environment where we've found thriving communities has added new possibilities to our search for extraterrestrial biology. But perhaps the most profound lesson that Earth's extremophiles teach us about alien life isn't about where to look, but about how to think. These organisms have shown us that life's creativity extends far beyond our ability to predict or imagine it. Every time we think we've found the limits of what biology can accomplish, life finds ways to exceed those limits in directions we never considered. This has humbled our approach to astrobiology in the most wonderful way. Instead of starting with assumptions about what alien life should look like, we're learning to start with questions about what might be possible. Instead of looking for biology that resembles what we're familiar with, we're developing techniques to detect life that might be completely unlike anything we've ever encountered. The search for biosignatures, chemical signatures that indicate the presence of life, has been revolutionized by our understanding of extremophile biochemistry. We're no longer looking just for oxygen and water vapor in the atmospheres of distant planets. We're also looking for the chemical signatures of methane-eating organisms, sulfur-processing bacteria, and other exotic metabolisms that we've discovered right here on Earth. Ancient philosophical traditions often spoke of the unity underlying apparent diversity, the idea that beneath the surface differences between things, there are common principles and patterns that connect all existence. The Extremophiles have revealed something similar about life itself, that beneath the vast diversity of forms and strategies, there are common threads that connect all biology. Whether an organism lives in boiling water or freezing ice, whether it eats sunlight or radiation or rock, whether it thrives under crushing pressure or in the vacuum of space, all life shares certain fundamental characteristics. The ability to extract energy from the environment, to maintain organization against the universal tendency toward disorder, and to reproduce that organization across generations. These common threads suggest that life, wherever we find it in the universe, will likely share these same basic characteristics, even if it expresses them in ways we can barely imagine. The Extremophiles have shown us that the specific details of how life solves these problems can vary almost infinitely, but the problems themselves seem to be universal. Indigenous wisdom traditions often emphasize the interconnectedness of all life, the idea that every organism is part of a larger web of relationships that extends far beyond what's immediately visible. The study of extremophiles has revealed something remarkably similar about the biosphere. Even organisms living in the most isolated and extreme environments turn out to be connected to larger patterns and processes that span the entire planet. The bacteria living in deep subsurface rocks are processing materials that originated in ancient oceans. The organisms thriving around hydrothermal vents are part of chemical cycles that connect the deep earth to the atmosphere above. Even the most isolated extremophile communities are participating in planetary-scale processes that link all of Earth's environments into a single, complex system. This interconnectedness suggests that when we do find life elsewhere in the universe, it's likely to be embedded in similar complex systems of relationships and cycles. Alien life probably won't exist in isolation, but will be part of larger ecological and geochemical networks that we'll need to understand to appreciate how that life functions and persists. The practical implications of what we've learned from extremophiles extend far beyond the search for alien life. These organisms are teaching us how to design more resilient and efficient technologies, how to clean up environmental contamination, how to develop new medicines and industrial processes. They're showing us strategies for surviving and thriving in challenging conditions that we can apply to everything from space exploration to sustainable living on Earth. But perhaps most importantly, the extremophiles are changing how we think about our own place in the universe. For most of human history, we've seen ourselves as special, as the primary or perhaps only form of intelligent life in a universe that was largely empty and sterile. The discovery of life thriving in Earth's most impossible environments suggests that we might be living in a universe far more full of life than we ever imagined. If life can thrive in boiling acid and frozen wastelands, in crushing depths and radiation-blasted surfaces, in environments with virtually no resources and under pressures that would flatten familiar organisms, then the universe suddenly becomes full of potential homes for biology. The same creativity that has produced Earth's extremophiles might be at work on countless worlds throughout the cosmos, creating forms of life that exceed even our expanded imagination. The extremophiles have taught us that alien doesn't necessarily mean from somewhere else. Some of the most alien life forms in the universe might be our own neighbours, quietly pursuing their impossible existences in environments we never thought to investigate because they seem too obviously hostile to life. As we continue to explore our own planet and search for life elsewhere, the extremophiles serve as constant reminders that life's creativity knows no bounds. They've shown us that the universe is far stranger, far more hospitable to biology, and far more full of possibilities than we ever dared to imagine. In learning to appreciate Earth's own aliens, we've prepared ourselves to recognize and welcome whatever forms of life we might encounter as we venture further into the cosmos. The extremophiles have been our teachers, showing us that the universe is not a hostile place punctuated by rare oases of life, but rather a vast landscape of opportunities where life finds ways to flourish in every corner, where chemistry and energy allow even the most basic biological processes to occur. They remind us that we live on a planet that is itself an alien world, full of organisms pursuing forms of existence so remarkable that they challenge our deepest assumptions about what it means to be alive. Picture yourself stepping outside on a quiet evening, perhaps after listening to our journey through Earth's most impossible places. You might look around at your familiar surroundings, The comfortable temperature of the air, the gentle pressure you don't even notice, the neutral chemistry of everything around you, and realize that you're standing in what amounts to a highly specialized niche environment that happens to suit one particular type of life rather well. But now you know that just a few miles beneath your feet, organisms are thriving in crushing pressures that would flatten you instantly. Somewhere not too far away, bacteria are having a perfectly pleasant afternoon in water hot enough to brew tea, while others are living quite comfortably in conditions so acidic they could dissolve metal. High above, microorganisms are drifting through radiation levels that would be lethal to most life, treating cosmic rays like gentle sunlight on a summer day. The familiar world you see around you, with its moderate temperatures and breathable air and drinkable water, represents just one small corner of life's vast empire. You've been living your entire existence in what amounts to a single room of an enormous mansion, while countless other residents have made themselves at home in the basement furnace, the freezer, the attic workshop, filled with exotic chemistry and rooms you never even knew existed. Our journey through these impossible environments has revealed something rather wonderful about the nature of life itself. Each extremophile we've encountered represents a different answer to the same fundamental question. How do you maintain the delicate chemistry of existence in a universe that seems determined to disrupt it? The solutions they've developed are so creative, so elegantly improbable, that they make our most imaginative science fiction seem conservative by comparison. Think about what we've discovered together: organisms that treat boiling water like a comfortable bath, bacteria that sleep for millions of years in solid ice and wake up ready to resume their activities as if no time had passed, life forms that literally eat radiation and find nourishment in conditions that would sterilize surgical equipment, creatures that thrive under pressures that could crush submarines and in acid that could dissolve coins. Each of these organisms represents billions of years of evolutionary problem-solving, countless generations of trial and refinement that have produced biological technologies more sophisticated than anything human engineering has achieved. They've learned to harvest energy from sources we barely recognize as resources, to build molecular machines that function in conditions we consider impossible, and to maintain life's essential processes while surrounded by forces that should make existence completely untenable. Perhaps most remarkably, these organisms haven't just solved the problems of surviving in extreme conditions. They've discovered advantages in these environments that more moderate habitats simply can't provide. The heat-loving bacteria around hydrothermal vents have access to chemical energy sources unavailable to surface dwellers. The pressure-adapted organisms of the deep ocean can use techniques for processing materials that only work under crushing force. The acid-loving communities have learned to extract nutrients from sources that would be toxic to most life. They've turned what we consider disabilities into superpowers, what we see as hostile environments into productive homes, and what we think of as impossible conditions into comfortable neighborhoods where they can pursue their own versions of happiness and success. This perspective shift has profound implications that extend far beyond biology. The Extremophiles have taught us that impossible is often just another way of saying requiring a different approach. They've shown us that the boundaries we perceive between possible and impossible are usually just the boundaries of our own experience and imagination. In a world increasingly concerned with sustainability and resilience, these organisms offer lessons that extend far beyond scientific curiosity. They've mastered the art of doing more with less, of finding opportunity in apparent adversity, and of thriving while working within constraints that would seem limiting to most other forms of life. They represent a completely different philosophy of existence, one based on efficiency rather than excess, adaptation rather than domination, and creativity rather than force. The Extremophiles have also fundamentally changed our relationship with the universe around us. For most of human history, we've seen ourselves as special cases in a largely hostile cosmos, rare islands of warmth and life in an ocean of sterile emptiness. But the discovery of life thriving in Earth's most impossible places suggests that we might be living in a universe far more full of life than we ever imagined. If organisms can flourish in boiling acid and frozen wastelands, in crushing depths and radiation-blasted surfaces, then the same creativity might be at work throughout the cosmos, creating forms of life in places we never thought to look and in ways we never thought to imagine. The universe suddenly seems less like a vast emptiness punctuated by rare oases of life, and more like an infinite garden where biology finds ways to bloom in every corner, where chemistry and energy allow even the most basic processes to occur. This realization is both humbling and inspiring. Humbling because it reminds us that our particular way of being alive is just one solution among countless others, no more or less remarkable than the strategies developed by organisms that breathe fire or sleep in ice. Inspiring because it suggests that life's creativity knows no bounds, that the universe is far stranger and more hospitable to biology than we ever dared to hope. As you settle into whatever comfortable conditions you've arranged for yourself tonight, take a moment to appreciate the remarkable fact that you're part of this incredible biological diversity. The same evolutionary processes that produced organisms capable of living in boiling water and frozen rock also produce the complex chemistry that allows you to think about those organisms and appreciate their impossible achievements. You are, in your own way, just as remarkable as any extremophile. The chemistry happening in your brain right now, the processing of information, the formation of memories, the generation of consciousness itself, is no less extraordinary than the biochemistry that allows bacteria to thrive in battery acid or survive million-year naps in solid ice. The only difference is that you happen to be adapted to conditions that feel normal to you, while they're adapted to conditions that feel normal to them. The Extremophiles remind us that there's no single right way to be alive, no standard set of conditions that life must accept, no fundamental limitations on what biology can accomplish given enough time and creativity. They've shown us that life is not a fragile accident clinging to existence in a hostile universe, but rather a robust creative force that finds ways to flourish wherever energy and chemistry allow even the most basic biological processes to occur. As we continue to explore our own planet and search for life elsewhere in the cosmos, the Extremophiles serve as constant reminders that we should expect to be surprised. They've taught us to look for biology in places we never thought to search, to recognize forms of life that don't resemble anything familiar, and to appreciate that the universe's creativity in generating living systems probably exceeds even our expanded imagination. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep in your perfectly temperate environment, surrounded by the gentle chemistry of familiar Earth conditions, remember that you share this planet with fire breathers and ice sleepers, with acid swimmers and pressure dancers, with radiation eaters and rock processors. You live on a world that is itself an alien landscape, populated by organisms so remarkable that they challenge our deepest assumptions about what it means to be alive. In learning to appreciate Earth's own aliens, we've prepared ourselves for whatever forms of life we might encounter as we venture further into the cosmos. The Extremophiles have been our teachers, showing us that the universe is not a collection of hostile environments occasionally punctuated by habitable oases. but rather a vast landscape of opportunities where life expresses its infinite creativity in every corner, where chemistry allows dreams to become reality. This is the sleepy astronomer, wishing you sweet dreams, fellow travellers on this alien world we call home. May your rest be as peaceful as a bacterium sleeping in million-year-old ice, as comfortable as an organism swimming in its favourite hot spring, and as restorative as the patient chemistry that has been creating impossibilities and calling them life for billions of years.